How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, today we're going to talk about false confessions, but the backdrop of this is going to be related to the Delphi murders. If you're not familiar with the Delphi murders, right now the trial is happening, and this gentleman here, Richard Allen, is being accused of the deaths of Abigail, Abby Williams, and Libby German. It's an interesting case right now. I had a chance to listen to a few hours of what we have going on in that case. Now, we're nowhere near experts on this case, but I believe there's a part of this case that me and my guest today, Russ Hamilton, could provide some insight into. But this case got a lot of stuff going on, guys. I mean, witness testimony seems to be a bit all over the place. Evidence. Now you got 61 confessions, and me and Russ are going to dive into the confession part. That's what the topic here is about. And then also even the description of the person who could have been the killer may not match the description of the person that they have currently in jail or in prison at this point, which is Richard Allen. So this is going to be a really good dialogue. I'm going to show you a video first after I bring in Russ, and then we're going to go into false confessions. And now, guys, again, we're not experts in this, but I think there'll be some information that we're going to provide you today that maybe you can apply within your area's expertise related to this case to what we have going on today with the Delphi murders. Okay, so let me get Russ. What's up, Russ?
Hey, how's it going, Anthony?
Good. Hey, Russ, do you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Sure. My name is Russ Hamilton. I'm a former and now retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Started my career way back when at San Quentin back in 1989. After I retired, I went to work for a juvenile detention facility where I was a senior juvenile correctional officer. And I currently work for a company, a private company where we do re-entry and rehabilitation work for a local county jail and a local probation department. I'm also the founder of Keepers of Chaos on Facebook, and Keepers of Chaos is dedicated to knowledge, training, history, and everything else that has to do with corrections to try and make it a little bit easier for those brave men and women that put their hearts and souls into this particular line of work.
Yes, and we love having you, Russ. Now, Russ, real quick, as I said, this case got a lot of stuff going on. I mean, just in what I was listening to today, I mean, it's a case that happened 7 years ago in February of 2017, and there's stuff being introduced now that just wasn't introduced before in the course of this investigation. And the big part now are these confessions. Now, as we watch this video, the reason why I feel me and Russ may be able to provide some insight here is they're saying that, yes, Richard Allen did make some confessions, but at the time he was in what they call solitary, which it's not solitary, guys. He was in some form of protective custody because that's kind of what they do with high profile cases, especially of this sort. And basically he was going through some duress, some mental health concerns. So they believe that he made these confessions while he was under duress, and therefore these confessions should hold no weight. At least that's what the defense attorney says. Now you also have obviously the prosecution who wants to introduce those confessions because that could be a big bulk of the case. But let me go ahead and show you this one video, guys. I think this video kind of it's a quick, about 2 minute and change video, but I think this video is a good way to start the episode. So let me go ahead and share it. All right. So you see it, right, Russ?
Yep.
All right. Let me play it.
Any further. Yeah. Also, for the first time today, we're getting a look at some of the documents and interviews that have been used in this investigation. Exhibits were shown to media in Fort Wayne courtroom today.
No cameras were allowed, but Fox 59's Eric Graves spent hours going through hundreds of pages, and he joins us now with a look at what stuck out to him today.
For the first time today, we got a look at Richard Allen's signed confessions to the Delphi double murders. Now, keep in mind, since there were no cameras allowed in the courtroom here behind me in Fort Wayne, this is a rough sketch of what that confession looked like on this Indiana Department of Corrections request for interview. You can see it says, "I am ready to officially confess for killing Abby and Libby. I hope I get the opportunity to tell the families I'm sorry." Then signed with Richard Allen's signature and dated received March 5th, 2023. Now, we do know that Richard Allen has made more than 60 apparent confessions, some to crimes that never happened. Further, those exhibits showed that the Delphi Police Department had an audio DVR error. All of the audio recordings of interviews were taped over up to February 20th, 2017. That is a 6-day window after the girls' bodies were found and that investigation into the murders began. The exhibit did not list who those interviews that were taped over were with. On the defense's side of things, those exhibits, more than 24 of them with hundreds of pages of documents, mostly went toward forming their theory around Odinism and that a group of Odinists were responsible for the killings of Abby and Libby. Multiple depositions and interview notes with people from Delphi and surrounding areas were made public to us today inside the courtroom, but Judge Gold has ordered that theory not be used in the trial happening right now. Further, many of those people that were named have not been mentioned publicly in any court documents or by police. We do expect to hear Richard Allen's confessions at some point during this trial from the prosecution. On the defense's side of things, they've continued to maintain that Richard Allen is an innocent man that was put under undue stress during his time behind bars. In Fort Wayne, Eric Graves, Fox 59 News.
All right, Russ, there's something else I want to read real quick. It comes from News 18, and then we'll go into our dialogue. So prosecutors and defense attorneys didn't dispute Wednesday that double homicide suspect Richard Allen, that's him right there, confessed to the crimes many times to many different people. But there was disagreement on the second day of the 3-day hearing that will set the stage for Allen's jury trial over whether the confessions were genuine or made out of desperation amid the conditions at the Westville Correctional Facility. Allen was being held at Westville before being moved to the Wabash Valley Correctional Facility ahead of the October trial. Wednesday's proceedings stretched late into the evening with much discussion about the Hole, a maximum security portion of Westville where Allen was held in solitary confinement for more than a year. This was reportedly at the order of prison administration for safety reasons. So I just want to mention, guys, this part kind of gets me upset because when it's for safety reasons, it shouldn't equate to solitary or the Hole. It's a whole different type of management that should not be. I mean, yes, security-wise could require some levels of restriction, but it's not the type of restriction that you would find in a punitive housing setting. So I don't like how the news may equate that. Allen had little privacy in the Hole, and he was under constant surveillance and rarely allowed to leave his cell. There was some debate Wednesday as to whether or not he had the ability to dim the lights. The unit was described as infested with bugs and mouse droppings and extremely noisy, with neighboring inmates calling Allen a baby killer and yelling at him to take his own life. Now, by the way, guys, we have no counterpoint on this either. This could be just coming from the defense side. So we don't have any perspective here from prison management or maybe correctional staff. And a lot of the videos I've been watching related to this incident is really promoting the defense and possibly the fact that they may have the wrong individual. That would make any man go crazy, Allen's attorney, Brad Rossi said. Allen's prison psychologist was called as a witness Wednesday afternoon and detailed the man's spiral into madness, which at some point included banging his head into the wall and eating his own feces. Dr. Monica Waller also recalled Allen's suicidal thoughts in testifying that he said death would bring him relief. Prosecutors said Allen's shift towards bizarre behavior happened after a meeting with his lawyers. Dr. Monica Waller noted in past reports her concerns that Allen was faking his symptoms. Real quick on this, I'm just going through it, and then Russ, I'll get your insight real quick. But I want to mention something, guys. When you got evidence on somebody and they know you may have evidence, usually the next thing they do is they start to question the due process or the credibility. And then eventually when that doesn't seem to go their way, they may look for some level of conditional forgiveness or ultimately down to I'm going to minimize what I've done to ultimately, okay, maybe I can try to control the narrative by admitting I'm guilty and then hoping I can get some leniency in where the sentencing is. So it's kind of funny here where all this happened after he met with his lawyers. What I was thinking of is maybe the lawyers may have realized that the prosecutor may not have that big of a defense. And now that you went ahead and put out these confessions, you just ruined our chances to focus on the on the due process, the collection of evidence. So now what they got to do is they got to now attack the confession. That's what they got to do. They got to attack the confession, because a lot of people may believe that the weight of a confession matters. But to be honest with you, it's really evidence that supports the confession. It's not that it's technically, even though the confession may be something that you want, you still need the evidence to back it. So anyway, Wallace said prison staff ultimately resorted to involuntarily injecting him at least once a month with antipsychotic medication. So basically right now they're just focusing on his mind not being all there. It was around this time that Allen made confessions to family, inmates, and guards, as well as Walla and other medical staff. Rozzy wants those confessions thrown out, blaming Allen's mental deterioration while in prison. Now think about that, guys. He gets the confessions thrown out, and then all you have are the concerns with evidence and due process. John Gallipow, who was the warden at the time, was called as a witness Wednesday morning and remembered hearing firsthand several of Allen's confessions. I killed those two girls, Gallipow reportedly heard Allen say while standing outside of the cell. Allen was on suicide watch and relegated to isolation for much of his time at Westville, which prosecutors noted was well beyond the 30-day threshold set by the Indiana Department of Corrections for inmates with serious mental illness issues. Gallipow responded that some inmates like Allen can be released into general population for safety, like Allen can't be released into general population for safety reasons, and that the suspect was treated the same as other inmates in solitary confinement. I think the verbiage there is a little unique. I think if that is exactly what the warden said, he shouldn't have said it that way. And maybe Russ could talk about that shortly. And then Special Judge Fran Gold took Wednesday's argument under advisement and is expected to issue rulings in the near future. The last day of hearings begins Thursday morning. Prosecutors and defense attorneys are expected to argue if the jury can see possible evidence that a third party, in this case a group of Odinist worshipers, committed the homicide. You know what's funny, Russ? Real quick before we go into that, if that's exactly what the warden said, I would never compare the protective housing of an individual to solitary confinement. I would say because it's the notion of what solitary confinement is. I think that word or that term should be out, because we know that's not what it is. I think if you want to say isolation, I'm okay with that, because that's what you're doing. But when people see solitary confinement, they see this punitive perspective. When you know for a fact that inmates that are in some level of PC setting are getting to the best of what we can provide, what they're allowed to have, very similar to GP inmates.
Yeah, I think, one of the things is that PC tends to be a little bit isolative, but you can't even really say that it's necessarily isolation, because there's always going to be mental health there. There's always going to be other healthcare professionals. There's always going to be other officers. There's probably some other inmates within talking distance. It's hard to say. I'm not going to pretend that I know exactly what that setup is like. But over and over again through my career, I've seen people say, well, he's in solitary, and it's a meaningless term. Solitary used to mean that, you had no communication with the outside world whatsoever. But that's not something that we've done in modern corrections in the United States. So I think that, the warden should have been more specific about what it is. And what happens is we become careless with our words because we hear it repeated from each other, and we hear it repeated in the media. And so I think that you're exactly right that he should have been more careful with his words and given a fuller picture of exactly what those housing conditions are like.
Yeah, and again, I agree with you, Russ, man. It also plays out into the narrative. I'm wondering if the news may have just paraphrased and probably just equated PC to solitary. And again, if I was the warden or the PIO for Indiana, I'd be like, hey, you can't put those two together because that's totally different. And that actually starts to work well with the argument that the defense is trying to push. Now, granted, whether Richard Allen is innocent or not, that's not what this show is about. Because there's so much in that case right now that if I was not working and I was retired, I could devote some time to this. But with that said, I don't like the fact that the system is being attacked right now in an effort to say, well, the reason why he gave these confessions was because of the way he was housed inside the facility. Like Russ said, if you have an inmate that is in a close custody unit, I'm going to call it close custody unit because that's what it is. They're seen more by mental health, by medical, by program services. They're seen a lot more than the GP because they may not have immediate access like general population. So the service providers have to come to them. And therefore, there's communications now. For me, if somebody was starting to decompensate, obviously mental health would then say, you know what, this type of setting is really not working. Let's go ahead and move him to some level of treatment unit. And then at that point there, it's going to be how to balance the safety with that treatment unit. But it's funny how the mental health professional talks about, you know, what has happened to this individual and his mindset. But then the next question is, well, you're his therapist. You're just like, oh, what are you doing? Are you going to try to now maybe move him to a like a therapeutic community type setting where, you know, hopefully you can manage his safety while he's able to be under direct observation through mental health. But with that said, I have a few things here that I was hoping me and Russ could talk about real quick, and it's why people may give a false confession. And I think some could be common sense, but some do relate to the prison setting that I thought that me and Russ could explore. But I thought we could knock out a few easy ones right off the bat, Russ. So the first one I got, or two technically, is coercion and intimidation. Now, by the way, this confession, I don't believe happened during the interrogation process. I think this actually happened when he was in prison. Now, the funny thing about this, I want to mention something right now. Believe it or not, some people that commit these crimes, and again, I'm not saying Richard Allen did or not, but hear me out, just a perspective. There are some that may commit these crimes, and then when they're by themselves, they start to feel remorse. They start to feel guilty. And next thing you know, the person that you saw outside the wall could be a little different because now that they may not have as much interaction as they used to, and they may not be able to distract their mind from what they've done, this could be a way to go ahead and say, you know what? I want to get this out. I have to. You know, I feel remorseful. I feel guilty. And then you maybe got the lawyers that think, well, we have a case here on the evidence. So you need to pull back on those confessions. So now what we're going to do is we can't deny the fact that you made those confessions, but we're going to go ahead and work on disproving the integrity of those confessions by attacking the environment you're in, saying that you weren't in the right state of mind. And yes, some confessions were off, like a little off, but some were specific. I mean, so specific that the only person that would have known about certain areas of that confession would have been the person who did it. So for the coercion intimidation, if this was a police or interrogation pressure, in this case it wasn't, you have the intense questioning, the manipulation or threats during interrogations can lead individuals to confess falsely just to escape the immediate stress. And then for the physical and mental exhaustion, because mind you guys, interrogations, they could take hours upon hours. So eventually people start to get tired of, building lie after lie after lie that starts to get exhausted, that they start to resign. And at a certain point, they may find that it may be just a bit easier to move the process forwards, and they look to escape, and they wind up starting admitting to things in just an effort to escape, as opposed to really trying to resolve the matter. And that's the physical and mental exhaustion, Russ. The long hours of questioning, sleep deprivation, or isolation can impair judgment, causing individuals to comply with demands because, again, they're looking to escape the pressure. What's your thoughts on this first part?
So I think that this is actually possibly, depending on how things develop, is going to be a real problem, I think, for the prosecution. Because they are going to be able at this point to point to whatever they want in the body of those tapes that got erased, and be able to say, oh yeah, there was all kinds of coercion. There was all sorts of intimidation. They may not be able to get that in front of the jury unless there's something else there, but they might be able to get part of it in their summation by being able to say, hey, you know what? If you don't know as a jury member what went on in those initial things, you can't say that some of these other parts that leaked out weren't about that. And I think that the fact that he may or may not be somewhat, decompensating, because we've heard some about some of the drugs that they're giving him and so forth. might blend into that. It's really gonna, matter on how the jury sees that and how specific these alleged 61 confessions were. But I think that that missing footage, the missing tapes, is going to allow the defense to paint a lot on that canvas and to put some element of doubt in the jury's mind. But what that's going to equate to, I think, remains to be seen.
Yeah, and guys, by the way, if the prosecutor was building their defense, whatever their allegation, based on the confessions, and they got maybe kind of said, we got these confessions, maybe we could pull back a little bit. Well, the problem is the confessions, unfortunately, maybe I don't know if they were expecting them to answer these questions that they have that's happening right now, but unfortunately, now that the confession may not have as much weight, because now that the confession is being contested, now the evidence and stuff tends to be a bit of a concern, because there's a lot of questions in regards to the evidence, the witness statements, what the individual looked like, that now may not be as strong, because you don't have that admission from that individual. And one of the things I noted here, guys, is that when you are reliant on a confession, and this kind of relates to this, is that the things that can get challenged by the defense is the volunteer or the coercion. That could be a challenge. The credibility issue with key evidence. So yeah, the person confessed, but the evidence just doesn't fit, and that's, I think, where we're at now with this case. The damage to the narrative of guilt. So now, guys, remember, I think something here where if maybe he did make these confessions, could have been guilt, could have been whatever it was, but it was also an effort to control the narrative. Imagine you're by yourself, not knowing what the outcome is going to be, and it's like, I don't know what's going to be, so I might as well just get this over it and just take control of this narrative, take control of my future. And that could come out in the form of a confession, whether false or not. That could come out because that puts the narrative back in your hand. But unfortunately, at that point, the lawyers were like, well, wait a second, we got some control here. And the control is going to come from, this due process. And then you got the potential for the suppression of a confession, the impact on public perception and jury bias, and the opening the door to reasonable doubt. And again, that's just related to if you're relying too much on a confession, especially if it was a false confession. And now you have to kind of go ahead and relook at everything else that should have been the strength, right, Russ? Would you agree that the strength of a case like this really has to go beyond the confession? Because at any time, like just happened right now, it could be challenged, and now all you have is maybe a lot of evidence that's just not making sense, that you were hoping that the confession could actually piece things together and build more support.
Yeah, a confession alone is not enough. There has to be, there always has to be, evidence that secures that confession. I think that in this case, with the fact that there were so many of them and to so many disparate groups of people, is going to be a real problem for the defense, though. The other thing, that's going to come up is if any of those confessions, and we haven't heard everything that maybe those confessions entailed. I would guess that we've only heard, some of the surface level stuff. But it remains to be seen what he might have said about his gun. There were some forensics on that. With regards to the fact that apparently a bullet was chambered and then ejected, and that left tooling marks that they were able to, trace back to that specific gun because they found the bullet at the crime scene. So I think that that's what's going to be problematic in that fashion. Now, as to whether the bulk or any of the confession parts are true or not, I think that going to be kind of an interesting thing to see, because there's always a chance that let me just put it this way. Within the realm of the killers that I have known and talked to, they'll say any manner of things, and they will give false confessions. They will give real confessions. They will tell you lies. They will reconstruct things that happened and make things up all over again. So I think that some of that, fortunately or unfortunately for the jury, is going to be for them to have to pick apart. Now, if there's anything there that only the killer could have known, and then they tie it back into that gun, I think he's probably done for. But I think that that's, a far cry from being a certainty.
Yeah, and guys, real quick, when they talk about the conditions in the prison, I got some notes here that the defense attorneys, a couple of things, can argue that the confession was coerced due to poor prison conditions, intimidation, or mistreatment, making it inadmissible. I know they were talking about that the officers could have been with this religion, Odinism, and then basically they could apply pressure to him, and that they could hear his legal calls or not hear it. He's positioned in such a way where they could read his lips and kind of know what he's saying to his lawyers. Now, grant you, this is a tough one because you have to keep the person monitored, but you're not going to audio it. You're not going to be in earshot. So there could be officers that are looking at him, and that's for safety and security reasons, but they're not in a position to be able to hear what's being said. So I want people to realize that could be just a narrative that the lawyer is trying to paint, that the officers had a position in such a way that the officers can read their lips. No, but I have seen it where the officers are able to look into the room, but they're not in earshot. So they just have to look in the room for safety and security. I think that was a big sell from the defense attorney. You also have the mental health issues are present. The defense may claim the suspect was not in the right state of mind to provide a valid confession, casting doubt on whether it was voluntary or truthful. I like this part. If the confession is a central part of the prosecution's case, retracting it undermines its credibility, which forces the prosecution to rely more heavily on circumstantial evidence, which may be weaker. That's what we just talked about. I mean, if you got that confession, people may put a lot of weight on the confession, but the evidence isn't there. Now, if the confession's gone, the evidence itself won't be enough to hold it up. That's the concern. A retraction can also lead the defense to argue that the confession was a product of desperation, fear, or confusion, and not a true admission of guilt. Then you got, if the prosecution initially presented the confession as a solid proof of guilt, a retraction disrupts that narrative. Jurors may question the validity of the confession and the fairness of the legal process. The defense can introduce doubt by suggestion that the confession was a survival strategy to escape difficult prison conditions or coercion, which we're going to get into. What's your thoughts on all this so far, Russ?
So, in just listening to what the defense is doing is sounds to me like they are a little bit desperate. They tried to paint this whole, Odinism thing, and the fact that they couldn't substantiate anything is causing the judge to not allow any of that testimony, or and this, I think it's just like guesswork on their part, hoping that they can find something to stick to the wall and get the jurors all to go, oh, squirrel. So I think that looks desperate. I think that, depending on what happens with the judge and whatever else is going on mentally with him and this forced medication, I can see there's a potential that, some of the confessions might end up, not making it in front of the jury, but there's so many of them, there's just almost no chance that, some of this testimony is not going to be admitted. So, and that makes me think that the defense doesn't really have, any good avenues, with a possible exception that I'll get back to, that I come back to again, is with the portions of the tape that were, taped over or whatever. That gives them a good canvas to paint on. But again, it seems like it's a crapshoot, and it seems to me that they're desperate.
Now, Russ, I have here, now we start to get into where our expertise is. And guys, remember, we're not experts on this. We're just trying to fill this out because the audience requested it. And I would like, me and Russ like to give what the audience requests. And it does require a little bit of work on our end, but we enjoy it. So the fear of consequences of harm. In the prison dynamic, Russ, I have inmates may falsely confess to a crime they didn't commit to gain protection, avoid violence from other inmates, or align with powerful prison groups. Now, mind you, I don't know if this makes sense. Maybe someone else would know more, but he was getting ready to go to Wabash. So this was at Westernville. So could this been a way for him to try to not go? I don't know. Am I putting it out there? I don't know. I don't know the time frame, but for people that are following this case, maybe that could make sense. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know what the time frame is between the two. And then there, for this part, is also the fear of retaliation. They may confess to prevent worse outcomes, such as threats to their family or personal safety. Hey, Russ, I see people all the time confessing to crimes because they're hoping that in that confession that will automatically basically we're automatically going to put them in a PC area, because in their mind they rather be in PC than they would in GP. So they'll confess to anything because it's survival.
Yeah, that does happen, and you'll see people, manipulate the system all the time. They already know that there's a good chance that they're going to be, assaulted or taken off the yard in some manner. And so, they'll actually go in there sometimes with either good info or false info and rat someone out with the expectation that because they ratted someone out, right or wrong, true or false, that then they're going to be, committed to that element of protective custody. So that is a possibility. In this particular scenario, since it's really just, kind of a level playing field, and he's going to be locked up anyway, I don't see that happening. Although he may have had some relative fear, justified or unjustified, about being moved to a different facility. Now, I don't know what that entails in this case, but sometimes these guys, they do become a little bit desperate with the fact is they'd rather dance with the devil that they know than the devil that they don't know. So he may already have a level of comfort where he is.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Russ. I'm curious to see where the time frame is between the switch of the facilities, because I can actually see someone now in desperation mode. Now, guys, however you want to interpret this, you can. I'm not saying Richard Allen is guilty or he's innocent. I'm just putting kind of trying to be objective. But I can actually see an effort to be put in survival mode to say, you know what, screw it, I did it. In this case here, hopefully when he gets to the other prison, they maybe house him accordingly. Let's get him in PC because he now just said he was guilty. Now, some people would say, well, that's still coercion. Well, if he really did it, and at this point he could decide that I want to control the narrative, that would be a good opportunity to do it. I'm getting ready to be moved. Let me set my standards now. Let me set what it is that I want. But I think what happened here was, because again, he had just gotten done talking to his lawyers, was they were building out another case, I think based on due process errors, evidence, and all this other stuff, that now these confessions, which could have been done for survival or could have been done because Richard Allen wanted to take control of the narrative, which makes sense. Now it messes up their case. So now they have to go ahead and attack the credibility of the confessions. And the best way to do it, I think, is to attack the situations in which he was living, to go ahead and say that he was under duress. Now, this next part, Russ, comes with, in my mind, the effort to control the narrative, which is the desire of leniency. Remember, guys, I say usually when you're guilty of something and the evidence is there, the first thing you may attack is due process and credibility. But if that's not working and things are strong, eventually you're going to try to kind of move it down to either minimizing what you've done, which is still lack of accountability, or I'm going to admit it so I can control the narrative, but in an effort to gain some leniency. In this case here, it could just be where he's being placed. So for desire for leniency, I have plea bargaining pressure. Some may confess to lesser charge, hoping to receive reduced sentences, especially when the prospect of a harsher penalty looms large. But I don't see that much in this case because he did kill 2 girls. I think this is more about, hey, I know I'm going to be locked away for life, but I want to choose where I'm going to be locked away. And if that's the case, I'll go ahead and say I'm guilty. And then the cooperation exchange for favor. So confessions can be offered in exchange for privileges or reduced punishment from prison authorities or legal systems. Russ, I know you've definitely seen this, right? Kind of the quid pro quo that you say? Oh, you're muted, Russ.
There we go. Yeah, I was going to say the desire for leniency is often attached inside of us psychologically to actually, taking ownership of what happened. So that can be a powerful influence with regards to, you know, potentially giving a false confession. It can also be a powerful incentive to go ahead and try and take ownership in order to try and feel as if you have more control over what your future is going to be, because his future is going to be pretty bleak. You know, if he gets ends up you know, being found guilty. So I think that's probably, you know, the easiest psychological dynamic to look at right there. And then, you know, other than that, there was one more thing that I had just thought of, and I'm hoping it's going to come back to me, but let's go on to the next one then.
So the next one kind of relates back to kind of like, I don't think this is where the confessions occurred. But guys, you have different, I'll just speed through this. You have different types of interrogation techniques, read technique. You have good cop, bad cop. There's a bunch of techniques here. I have a few here. You know, techniques like there's one that's called the peace model, planning and preparation, engage and explain, account, closure, and evaluate. The unique thing about interrogations, guys, is there's such a balance between what you have to get the person to admit and, of course, the tactic. And a lot of times when the tactic is under question, people could see it as being coercion, or that the person is has been threatened, or whatever it is. And the problem is that the techniques do get challenged a lot, but these techniques have a finesse. It's such a finesse that when you have a true expert, they're able to go ahead and stand up and challenge anyone that says that these confessions were coerced. I don't know too much about the interrogation process here. I was trying to look for some videos, but in the process, everything's up there right now is about the court trial. But I would like to think that these were trained investigators. But again, there were no confessions, or not that I know of at this point. I believe the confessions came when he was inside prison. So we can go ahead and skip past that. I just wanted to kind of cover it, that sometimes people will blame the tactic or the technique. Oh, go ahead, Russ.
Well, I was going to say, and this is one thing that I've, you know, just said that I've been trying to remember, is the fact that you know, they did use some dishonesty with him, you know. And so you know, officers are allowed to do that, but not with subjects you know, that would otherwise be prone to giving them a false confession. This is another thing that's going to be reviewed by the judge. I don't know if people remember, but back in the Susan Smith case, they approached her and it was some dishonesty, but it was kind of a little bit more of a ruse, because they had said that, oh, you know, where you said that your children were taken from, we were set up there on doing a drug deal or something like that. And so they said, are you sure that that's the place where it happened at? And so eventually they got her to break down. In this case, I believe that they had told him that that they had some evidence from the bridge. I believe they told him they had a witness or something. And so whether or not that would have sparked him to falsely confess, I think it's hard to say when you have a subject that has some mental problems already. But that could be part of what's being baked into this cake. But hopefully we'll know more after this week.
Yeah, and guys, even though the confessions I don't think happen here, the read technique is interesting because it has. I know a little bit about the read technique because I worked with a gentleman in Dale Fowlers who trained me in IDB, which was at the time called Identifying Deceptive Behavior. Again, there's no behavior that can tell you if someone's lying or not, but there's behavior that can showcase some levels of deception. And part of that training required certain elements of the read technique. And I remember when he was teaching me some of the read technique, they would minimize things. So it was hard to get someone to admit that they committed murder. So they may use words like accident. You know, it's hard to get someone to admit that they stole something. So they may use words like take. They would minimize the actions because they feel that it would be a lot easier for people to admit to. But there's also another side of that Russ reminded me of. And thank you, Russ. There's also the maximization as well that I believe it may be the read technique as well, where they can exaggerate and in some cases exaggerate evidence. It's not that they're lying, but they may exaggerate in an effort to build pressure. Remember, guys, when you're interviewing someone, maybe at first when you're trying to build that rapport, you try to build comfortability, you try to find their baseline, and you kind of ask them open questions where they can pull from, and there's really no pressure. But then as you start to collect the evidence and you start to pigeon them, you start to hold them down to certain areas of where you have concern. Well, now, saying something as simple as, let me hear your side of the story, could provide pressure because they don't know what you've heard. And now they got to work their dynamic around what they may believe is the evidence that you have. And I believe, again, it's a very any type of interview and interrogation is a very unique challenge, because once you build a rapport to get what you need, and then all of a sudden you cross into that interrogation aspect, there's no turning back. You're now at that point. So you really got to make sure that your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted. But again, I think it's kind of a little bit off topic, because this wasn't where the confession was made, but this could fall into where false confessions could happen. All right. So then the next one I got, Russ, is the social or psychological pressure. So social psychological pressure, what I have written here is, you got someone that's low self-esteem or just complies. You got people with low self-worth, cognitive impairment, or a tendency to seek approval may give in under pressure. Mental health issues, anxiety, depression, or suggestibility can make individuals more vulnerable to manipulation or coercion. Again, I don't think that's the case here, but it could be another reason why people provide false confessions. Would you agree, Russ?
Yeah, it can go with that whole hand-in-hand thing about being perceived as helping by going ahead and, caving to the pressure, feeling like you're going to bring closure for the investigator, the interrogator, because they want to establish a rapport. They don't want to establish something that's oppositional. They want to come off as being your friend. And so what is it that, people want to do? They want to help their friend. They tend to lose objectivity as to what the whole scenario that's unfolding about them is about. And they start to skew what the relationship means. Because, these guys, they're not there. They're not coming off as hard asses, and they're not in there playing this, the whole alleged, good cop, bad cop. And they're not, reading them their rights and telling them they're going to prison forever. They're just in there, asking, hey, what happened? Can you tell us your side? Like you pointed out before, or they're querying them, we just don't help us understand, tell us something, confess, and maybe you will find some leniency. And they just keep, pulling at those strings, and sometimes, depending on how tightly someone is wrapped or not, you can get a bogus confession out of them just like that.
Yeah, and guys, by the way, like Russ said, if interrogations, not, again, a little off topic here, but they're so challenging, they definitely take an emotional toll, that if someone does have a true mental health concern or may not have that, may not be as smart as the average Joe, these interviews could become inadmissible, because the fact is that it's so challenging, and people that could have lower IQs could be very suggestible, where you may actually project onto them that they've really done it and they've been innocent. It's like, no, I didn't do it. And all of a sudden you keep on, pressuring them and asking them questions. And all of a sudden they start to piece it together. And next thing you know, they're saying, yeah, I did do it. And technically their only recollection is what you provided them. You could have some type of projection from the interviewer, especially during the interrogation aspect, where there's high pressure that the person could start to slowly take in, and their memories could wind up blending with what the interrogator is saying. All right, so false sense of altruism or loyalty. So taking the fall for someone else. For some reason, when I saw that, I was thinking of the son of Sam, who may have been in multiple places at once, and they may not believe it was him. It could have been another group. And then they bring in this odinist for this guy, Richard Allen. So individuals may confess to protect someone they care about, family member or friend, or to show loyalty to a group or a gang, or it could be the gang's pressure them that you're going to take the fall on this. And I know it's funny because they pull the mental health concerns, but then they pull this odinist group, which is funny because when they say odinist group, that's more of the religion. I think they're trying to say maybe some white supremacist group. But with that said, it's funny how they're covering all bases here. You know, you basically have the mental health concern, or you have the pressure to say something because you're being forced to by a group. And then the pressure from the inmate culture. In some prison environments, individuals confess to maintain group loyalty or avoid being labeled as uncooperative. What's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Yeah, there's a whole mixed bag there. But people will do things, for that sense of loyalty. They'll do things for, third party extortion if they feel their family's in danger. And it may just be like with a lot of the gang cultures and stuff that I've seen is they will take the fall, because that's, part of the honor amongst thieves and gangbangers, as it were. And so, if their number's up, they'll say, hey, yeah, that was me. And then later they end up having buyer's remorse, and it's very difficult for them to, extricate themselves from that initial thing. And you see that a lot, or at least I have that told to me a lot by various people who are involved in the criminal justice system, as it were. They'll always talk about the time that they took the fall for someone else, because that's kind of viewed in a really good light by that particular segment of the population, if you will.
Yeah, and guys, that part where we talk about pressure from the culture, I mean, if that was the case, I think that's a real unique move from the defense team. But it does apply in some cases where, you're going to take the fall for us because now you're in our world. So do this and we got you. But again, that definitely, I'm not saying that's the case for this, but they did bring it in. The other thing I got, Russ, right now is we talked about this briefly. The confusion or memory distortion. Anything you want to add to that? Because I kind of just touched on that by mistake a few moments ago.
Yeah, some of these people that are, criminal justice involved, they are, not the sharpest tools in the box. And, they can have their memories molded by slick manipulators. I'm not saying that the interrogators or the investigators did any of that, but it's a possibility. And once again, I'll harken back to the fact that we do know that he has some pending mental illness angle, because he is receiving this forced medication. And so he has that, and that can be actually compounded by the medication being there. And whatever he's on, it's probably Thorazine or something like that. And so he could be experiencing some type of memory distortion or delusion, or just not puzzling things through well.
And guys, this last one here, the hopelessness and resignation, there's a unique spin on this that I do believe, again, if you're trying to make a false confession, but now you feel that, hey, no matter what, no one's going to believe you anyway, because you've been going through this process for so long, that if you get released, even if people say you weren't guilty, or you get released on a technicality, which is probably even worse, then people, I mean, in this case here, when you're being tried for so long, I mean, this case has been going on for over 7 years. The release on the technicality is not going to clean you up when you go out to the community. They're still going to have that judgment. I mean, literally, unless they can find the person who did it, and it's absolute, that Richard Allen will be seen as that person. So some individuals feel trapped or overwhelmed by the system, confess, believing that no one will believe in their innocence anyway, or they just have a desire to end the process, which, as I said, is just to control the narrative, to escape an unbearable interrogation or legal situation. Some falsely confess just to bring the ordeal to a conclusion. I'm thinking, Russ, at this point here, the case has been going on so long, if he was doing a false confession, it could be, listen, I'm going to get judged anyway. So unless they could truly find out who this individual is and it's beyond a reasonable doubt, I'm still going to be judged. So even if you let me out on a technicality, it doesn't prove I'm innocent. It just says I'm let out because there was a due process concern. Hey, Russ, anything you want to say on that?
Yeah, I would say that, this one, last but not least, of course, This is sometimes just an attempt to salvage what you can. It's hopeless. They become resigned to it, as you said, and then, hey, what can I do in order to better my best shot at having some type of life? And so the calculus with regard to that is to go ahead and buy into it. And so sometimes that's what some people do is, and with all of the other things that he has on his plate, is that a possibility? Sure. The other possibility, of course, is that he just is actually, guilty for this crime.
Yeah, and guys, I think the big thing is whether he falsely confessed or he really did and they're trying to recant it. The thing is, it is always going to be an effort to control the narrative. I mean, think about this. If he's going through trial, maybe this is his way of saying, you know what, I have here avoiding the uncertainty of a trial. He may prefer the certainty of a negotiated sentence over the risk of a harsher outcome if found guilty. I believe if this person did do it, I was leaning on the psychological relief or guilt. Maybe that if he did go mad and it's not being a ploy, maybe that's what made him mad. Maybe that's what made him crazy, is that he did something, however impulsive it was, and now he has to live with the guilt. And then when he was by himself, it came out. And now maybe that's what's manifesting its way into his behaviors. And again, I have here seeking closure. Some prisoners confess out of a desire to unburden themselves from guilt, hoping for emotional relief. And then you have religious and moral motivations. But I think in this case here, it's funny how this all seemed to happen after he had his meeting with the lawyers. But if there was a reason why he could be going insane, and let's say this happens to be true, again, it could be he's coming to grips with what he's done. And maybe there's some remorse or guilt that's working on the subconscious level that's pushing him to these means. Hey, Russ, if that makes sense. But Russ, you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yeah, it's always interesting to, hear these cases. It's kind of interesting to dissect them. I think that, when you start looking at, where we are as a culture and where we are with regards to the way the system works or the way the system doesn't work, it's important, I think, for people to be informed and to understand what's going on and what works really well and what doesn't work at all. And, let curiosity be your guide. And we're here to maybe satisfy a little bit of that for whatever that's worth.
I like that. And guys, again, we're not experts on the case, but I thought there was something here that me and Russ could discuss now, especially because people are asking us. So, I mean, could every point that we said be challenged? Of course it can, because yes, we're trying to relate it to the case, but you guys know what best and what areas may apply and which ones don't. And I think that's what could make this a very interesting dialogue or discussion. But in my closing, it's just real quick. Sometimes it's good to throw a lot of things out there, whether it comes from experience or just a guess, and then, see where the chips fall. And you never know, guys. You may land on something that you didn't intend to land on. And I think a dialogue like this could open up some perspectives as well. As always, guys, the show is Tear Talk. Stay safe.